By the time Sheriff Jonah Vale spotted the woman with the county ledgers strapped beneath her saddle, she was kneeling in the dust with one hand buried in the wire around a terrified colt's leg, and 3 armed men were already riding hard to kill her. He reined up in the lip of the wash and listened. The colt was screaming through its nose, a thin, high sound. The woman never looked at him. She only braced her boot in the dirt, worked the barb free, and kept talking low to the animal as if the rest of the world could wait its turn. Her hat had blown back on its cord. Her hair was dark with sweat at the temples. There was blood on her sleeve that might have been hers or the colt's. The oilskin bundle tied behind her saddle was squared off too neatly to be blankets. Jonah had spent 14 years learning the difference between a rider in trouble and a rider who was trouble. He could not yet tell which one she was, and that was the first thing that made him stay. If you're listening tonight from a kitchen with the dishes still drying, or a porch where the last heat of the day is just beginning to go, tell me where in the world you're hearing this from. Stories like this travel better when they know who is keeping them company, and lonely roads feel different when you remember how many lamps are lit beyond them. Jonah slid from his horse without a sound. The wash still held the night's damp beneath the crust, and he read it the way other men read newsprint. One rider. One spare mount gone lame a mile back. No sign of panic. No wasted circling. No blind running. Whoever she was, she moved like a person who thought 3 turns ahead and never counted on mercy. The wanted notice in his pocket had called her a thief, an assailant, a danger to county property and public order. It had not said anything about stopping in open country to cut a colt free when any sensible fugitive would have left it shrieking and ridden on. Your left side's worse, he said. Only then did she turn. The little revolver in her hand came up level and steady, so fast it made the air feel thinner. She had gray eyes, not soft ones. Tired ones. The kind that had spent too many months looking at numbers no one else wanted to see. My left side is my affair, she said. You the sheriff? He touched the brim of his hat once. Jonah Vale. Something moved across her face then. Not fear. Recognition, and something close behind it that looked a great deal like disappointment. I was hoping they'd send a fool. Behind them, far off but closing, came the drumming rise of horses taking hard ground at speed. Jonah glanced toward the ridge. Dust was lifting there in a pale sheet. You're Mara Kincaid. That's what they've been calling me since birth. Silas Rusk says you stole his ranch ledgers, broke into the county recorder's office, and struck Deputy Pike with a branding hammer. She returned the revolver to her belt, which told him more than if she had kept it raised. I took books that prove he's been stealing water and land from every widow and smallholder between Bracken and the East Creek. As for Harlan Pike, I struck him with the nearest thing to hand when he locked the office door and said no one would believe a woman over him. If I'd had the hammer first, I'd have saved us both time. The colt lurched free. She sat back on her heels, breathing through pain now that the work was done. Jonah saw the rip in her sleeve more clearly. A crease of bullet burn crossed the top of her arm. Not a deep wound, but not old either. You can explain that before the judge. She looked up at him, then in a way that made the word judge sound childish. If you take me back under that warrant, I won't see a judge. Rusk's men are the ones behind you, not yours, and they're not riding this hard for a woman who misplaced a ledger. Jonah felt, rather than heard, the truth settle somewhere heavy in his chest. He had served in Bracken long enough to know the sound of lawful urgency and the sound of private vengeance pretending to be law. The riders coming over that ridge were too many and too eager for the first. He stepped closer and held out his hand. Let me see the order. She laughed once, dry as mesquite bark. You have it. The papers. For a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she rose, favoring the injured side, untied the oilskin bundle, and handed him one book and a folded sheaf wrapped in twine. Her fingers were nicked with paper cuts and reins. A bookkeeper's hands, except for the callus along the thumb from roping and leatherwork. He opened the ledger just enough to see columns of figures, names he knew, dates, acreages, water shares. Mrs. Bellamy, Nate Gruber, the Soto brothers, 2 homesteads out by Mule Spring. Numbers crossed and re-entered in a second hand. Fees doubled. Signatures that looked right until you stared. On the back page, in neat pencil, a single line. Compare witness marks to county copies. The first rider topped the ridge. Mara, Jonah said, closing the book, get behind that shale shelf. She did not move. Sheriff, if you've decided to take me, do it before they come into range. I won't be dragged from your stirrup to theirs. The second unanswered question struck him then, hard as a thrown stone. Why was a wanted woman more afraid of the men coming to claim her than of the law sent to arrest her? The answer arrived with the first shot. Rock splintered 6 inches from Jonah's boot. Another tore through the brim of his hat. The riders spread without waiting for orders, using the ridge line like men who had done this before. One voice carried clear over the wash. Kill the horse if you have to. Rusk wants the papers. Jonah did not remember drawing his gun. He only remembered the feeling of the world narrowing to the width of a trigger and the hard plain fact that no honest arrest ever began with men firing into a wash before they could see who stood inside it. He shoved Mara down behind the shale and fired once over the ridge, not to hit, only to make them check their pace. That's enough. The answering laugh came from Harlan Pike. Jonah knew the man by his lazy vowels and the ugly pleasure in them. We'll take it from here, Sheriff. You can ride back with your badge clean. Mara's face had gone still in that dangerous way some people go still when fear has had too much practice to show itself plain. There, she said softly. Now you know. Jonah looked at her, then at the lame spare horse, then at the ledger in his hand. He thought of the room above the jail where no second pair of boots had stood by the door in 8 years. He thought of his wife and his cedar chest, still closed, still locked, because grief had been easier to live beside than to open. He thought of Silas Rusk sitting across from him 2 nights ago with his slow smile, praising Jonah's honesty a shade too warmly, as if it were a lever he expected to pull. The easy path lay straight in front of him. Hand her over. Keep the badge. Let Bracken go on mistaking order for justice, same as every other town with a man too rich to be crossed. Instead, he shoved the ledger back into her hands, caught her horse by the reins, and put them at her chest. North rim, he said. Stay low through the cut bank, then angle for Bishop's Draw. Don't favor the horse. He'll feel it and go lame. She stared at him as if she had misheard. He fired twice more toward the ridge, buying her seconds. Ride, Mrs. Kincaid. What about you? I'll leave sign enough to make them think I lost you honest. Something broke loose in her eyes then, not quite trust, but the first place where it might one day sit. She swung into the saddle with a gasp she tried to hide. Harlan will tell them, you helped me. I expect he will. She looked at him one breath longer, then touched the brim of her hat in the same small way he had touched his, and turned north. By the time Rusk's men reached the wash, Jonah Vale was standing alone in the dust with his empty hat brim hanging ragged, the taste of powder on his tongue, and the unmistakable understanding that his life had just split cleanly in two. He gave them the trail she had not taken. That bought Mara Kincaid half a day and cost Jonah nearly everything by sundown. Bracken was the kind of town that tried hard to look more permanent than it was. Board sidewalks. A church with a bell too fine for its clapboard walls. 2 cottonwoods by the well that dropped a thin shade across the mercantile porch around noon. By evening, every window seemed to watch. When Jonah rode in, women drawing water stopped drawing. Men outside the barber shop let their talk thin down to nothing. Old Mr. Kelso at the feed store took his spectacles off and polished them against a handkerchief that had never improved a lens in its life. People made a habit of looking away from a sheriff only when they were thinking the same thing at once. Silas Rusk was waiting in Jonah's office with one boot crossed over the other and his hat resting on his knee, as if the room belonged to him in all but paperwork. He was a large man gone soft at the middle without losing the impression of strength. His hair had silvered first at the temples. His cuffs were too clean for a cattleman and his hands too smooth for a man who talked as often as he did about hard work. Harlan Pike leaned by the bars, rolling a matchstick from one side of his mouth to the other. Well, Rusk said mildly, this is a surprise. Jonah shut the door behind him. You fired on an active warrant service. Rusk smiled as if Jonah had said something charmingly naive. My men rode to support the law. Your men rode to kill a woman. Harlan pushed off the bars. That woman near put me in the ground. With a branding hammer, Jonah said. If she meant to kill you, she'd have chosen better. Harlan's jaw shifted around the matchstick. Rusk did not bother glancing at him. What matters, Rusk said, is the paper she took. A woman with a grievance can do a great deal of damage if she's allowed to mistake theft for righteousness. Jonah did not remove his gun belt. The matter at hand is why your deputy ordered my prisoner shot. She wasn't your prisoner, Harlan said. No, Jonah said. She wasn't. Silence took the room then. Not loud. Worse. The kind that made the walls seem to lean in and listen. Rusk's smile thinned. Careful, Sheriff. Jonah set his hat on the desk. You had me carry your warrant. You knew what I'd do with it. Honest law is a useful harness until it starts asking questions. Isn't that so? Harlan spat the matchstick into the corner. Judge Danner's sending over new papers. You can explain yourself to him. Gladly. He was less glad an hour later, standing in the judge's back room, while Danner adjusted his collar and read from the replacement order in a voice made stern by practice rather than nature. Jonah was to continue pursuit. Failing immediate apprehension, temporary supervisory authority over county action would pass to Deputy Pike in matters concerning the Kincaid theft and related public risk. There were words about negligence, about public confidence, about the county's obligations to stable governance. Stable governance, Jonah thought, was what crooked men called their own comfort. By the time he reached the boarding house porch after dark, Mrs. Bellamy was sitting there with her mending basket in her lap and a jar of salve beside her. She had been widowed so long that most folks in Bracken remembered her in black more easily than in color. She had a habit of pinning thread between her lips before speaking, which made every sentence sound as though she had considered silence first. You're bleeding through your shirt, she said. It's dust. Dust doesn't drip. He sat on the porch step because she was the kind of woman who took offense at stubbornness when there was ordinary care to be done. Her fingers were blunt and warm as she worked salve into the crease in his shoulder where Rock's splinter had opened him. Town's talking, she said. Town's always talking. Tonight it's listening, too. That's rarer. From inside came the clink of plates being stacked. The boarding house smelled of onions, lamp oil, and soap. Jonah had lived there 8 years. Long enough for everyone to quit asking whether he meant to marry again. Not long enough for the empty chair at his table to stop feeling borrowed. Mrs. Bellamy tied off the bandage. Silas Rusk came through this county with 2 mules and 1 good suit, she said. Now he's a man who thinks creek water belongs to whoever can write his name nearest it. Jonah looked up. She snipped a thread with her teeth. A widow hears things. Men forget we stay in a room after they stop looking at us. He thought of the ledger page in his pocket. Did Anna ever know Mara Kincaid? Mrs. Bellamy's hands paused only a fraction. Church sewing circle. Relief parcels. Your Anna knew most everybody who needed help and half the people too proud to admit it. That all. For most women in a place like this, Sheriff, that all is another name for the whole world. He slept little. Near midnight he lit the lamp in his office, locked the door, and spread the copied page Mara had slipped into the fold of the stolen ledger. Witness marks. Water entries. Transfer fees. Men who had never learned letters suddenly signing full names in 3 different hands. His eye moved to the margin and stopped. Beside one transaction, written small in pencil, was a notation in a hand he knew even after 8 years of not seeing it. Witness copy sent with AV for safekeeping. Anna Vale. Jonah sat back slowly. The room sounded different after that, as if some old board in it had decided to give way at last. Anna had been dead 8 years. Fever after a hard birth that ended in a still little body and a dawn he had not reached in time because he had been 10 miles out after a horse thief who turned out not to matter to anybody by winter. He had come home to a house gone quiet in all the ways that count. Since then he had done his duty like a man shoveling dirt over something still breathing. Now here was Anna's hand reaching out of the dark to tell him she had seen this coming. He left before first light. Jonah tracked Mara north through Bishop's Draw, where the ground went stony and kept secrets poorly. She had doubled back once to throw off pursuit, watered both horses at a seep under juniper, and cut east when any reasonable fugitive would have kept north. He found her near noon at a sheep camp abandoned since spring, standing over a boy of about 10 with a wet cloth in her hand and a kettle steaming on coals. The boy looked up through fever glaze. Mara did not. You ride a loud horse for a tracker, she said. It was either that or send you a telegram. She sat back from the boy and wrung out the cloth. He belongs to the Alvarez place. Took sick trailing sheep with his uncle. I found him alone with a water skin and 2 biscuits. If you've come to arrest me, give me long enough to get his fever down. Jonah felt a tired, unwilling admiration slide into place. Even hunted, she kept stopping for things that did not profit her. I came to ask why my wife's name is in your margins. That got her attention. The gray in her eyes changed shape. Anna kept a packet for me. She never mentioned it. She wouldn't. I asked her not to. My husband, Thomas, surveyed Rusk's diversion ditches the year before he died. He found acreage watered on paper that had never seen a creek, and creek claims filed against land belonging to people who'd been dead 2 years. I kept Rusk's books after Thomas was gone. Men talk plainly around a widow when they think grief has made her harmless. It never does. It only makes a person quiet enough to hear. She handed the cloth to Jonah without asking whether he would take it. He held it to the boy's brow while she fed sticks into the fire. I started copying what I could, she went on. Anna was sending blankets to the Bellamy twins that winter. I trusted her. More than the judge. More than the recorder. If anything happened to me, she was to hold the witness copies till I found a way out. Then she died, and no decent woman goes asking a fresh widower to open his dead wife's things on a rumor. Jonah stared at the cloth in his hand until the steam cooled out of it. What's in the packet? Original witness marks. A survey sheet in Thomas's hand. One receipt signed by Rusk himself for water shares he claimed never existed. Enough to crack him open, if it reaches the right desk before Monday. Monday, the Territorial Land Examiner comes through San Tomas on the noon train. Judge Danner means to file final transfer orders before that. Once the county copies are blessed, every widow east of town can scream herself hoarse, and it won't bring her land back. The boy muttered in Spanish and turned his face toward Jonah's wrist. Mara softened instantly, brushed the damp hair off his forehead, and spoke to him in the slow, practical tone women use when they are more frightened than they mean to show. There were easier women than Mara Kincaid. Easier to judge. Easier to help halfway. Easier to leave. He set the cloth aside. How long till the fever breaks? An hour if the willow bark does its work. Good. Because when it does, you and I are riding back to Bracken. Her chin lifted. That's the dumbest thing you've said since yesterday. The packet's in Anna's cedar chest, if it's anywhere. I'm the only one with a key. Rusk's men are watching your office, your room, the livery, and likely every road that matters. I know the alleys better than they do. She studied him for a long moment, measuring what had changed. Why? He could have said Anna's name. He could have said Law. He could have said because he had watched bullets chip stone around a woman trying to save a colt and had not liked what it showed him about the men claiming righteousness. Instead, he said the thing nearest truth. Because I'm tired of calling a fence justice just because it's straight. Something like weariness eased in her face then. Not gone. Just shared. They waited for the boy's fever to settle. Jonah rode him to the Alvarez turnoff with Mara walking beside the horse, one hand on the child's ankle to steady him. At the far gate, old Mrs. Alvarez came out carrying a broom like a weapon and tears like weather. She took the boy and kissed Mara on both cheeks before seeing Jonah, at which point she stiffened and crossed herself. Mara said only, "Keep him cool. Onion broth if he'll take it." Mrs. Alvarez nodded and thrust 2 cloth-wrapped tortillas into Mara's hand. No speech, no gratitude performed for the sheriff's benefit. Just the kind of loyalty that grows in quiet corners where officials seldom look. They made camp that night in a dry arroyo under a leaning cottonwood. Jonah watered the horses while Mara repaired a torn cinch with an awl and a length of rawhide from her saddle roll. The moon had not yet risen. Firelight moved over her knuckles and the firm set of her mouth. She worked the way some people pray, fully, without any waste of motion. "You sew leather better than most men in town," he said. "I balance books better than all of them," she answered. "That's why they'd rather call me a thief." He sat across from her and took the tortilla she handed over. For a while there was only the hiss of coals and the horses cropping what little grass the arroyo offered. Then Mara said, almost as if continuing a thought she had been carrying alone for years, "Most folks can stomach a lonely man. It's a lonely woman who frightens them." The line settled between them with the quiet certainty of a nail driven home right. Jonah looked at her and knew he would hear those words again long after the rest of the night had gone. "Why?" he asked. "Because a lonely man is assumed to be waiting for life to come back. A lonely woman is assumed to have learned she can live without permission." He let out a breath that was nearly a laugh and not amused at all. "That make me easier company? It makes you less likely to explain me to myself." They rode before dawn. At Miller's Bend they saw the first sign of how quickly the world had turned against them. A fresh notice nailed to the telegraph post carried Jonah's name beneath Harlan Pike's temporary supervisory authority, noted in Judge Danner's stiff language. Failure of apprehension. Probable collusion. Public caution advised. By noon, a ranch hand loyal to Rusk had set 2 men at the South Bridge and another pair by the freight yard. At the back door of the butcher's, little Owen Satterley from the livery, red-haired, forever whistling through the gap in his front teeth, pretended not to see them until Jonah spoke his name. Then the boy jumped, shoved a burlap sack of apples into Mara's hands, and said too loudly for any listener not to hear, "No, sir, ain't seen anybody heading toward the old mission road," before whispering, "Mrs. Bellamy says your room's watched, and the judge has men at the stairs." The world was closing now, not all at once, piece by piece, the way weather closes over a valley until a man looks up and realizes the blue has gone. They hid in the shade behind the cooper's shed while the church bell marked 2 o'clock. Across the street, Harlan Pike rode by with 4 ranch hands and a Winchester laid across his lap. He did not look toward the shed. That made Jonah more uneasy than if he had. Mara watched them pass. "If you walk away now," she said, "you might still keep enough of your name to start somewhere else." He looked at her. "And you?" "I'll do what I came to do. And if you can't," her mouth tightened, "then I'll fail expensive." The question had been waiting for him since the wash, and maybe for some of you listening too. What do you choose when decency asks a price safety never will? When the thing that lets you sleep with yourself might cost the only place in the world that still knows your name? Do you hold on to the place or the person standing in front of you? Jonah reached into his vest and set Anna's key in Mara's palm. "We go in at dark," he said. Bracken looked different after sunset when a man had to sneak through his own town. Jonah had walked those alleys in snowmelt mud and August dust, had hauled drunks from the saloon porch and delivered babies to houses with no doctor in them, had stood under that church bell on 3 election days and 1 hanging. But that night, every board creak sounded accusatory, every lit window like an eye. He led Mara through the gap behind the blacksmiths, across the narrow strip of shadow between the mercantile and the barber, then around to the outside stairs behind the jail. Halfway up, a lantern flared below. "Rear alley," someone called. Jonah shoved Mara flat against the railing, killed the lamp in the hall with the heel of his hand, and listened to boots thunder past beneath them. Harlan's voice rose and fell. "Too far south." "Good." His room above the jail smelled of cedar gone dry, old paper, and the ghost of coffee. For 8 years he had slept there among untouched objects that seemed to belong to another man. Anna's shawl over the chair, her Bible on the washstand, the small blue cup she used to keep hairpins in. He crossed to the chest by the bed and knelt. His hands failed him once on the key. Mara said nothing. She only set the stolen ledger on the floor, lit a single match, and held it low while he opened the lock. Inside lay folded linens, 2 baby shirts never worn, Anna's sewing basket, and the thin handmade quilt she had stitched during the last winter of her life, all cream muslin and faded red stars. Jonah touched the fabric and felt his throat close like a fist. He had not allowed himself this. Not once. Not in 8 years. Mara crouched beside him. "Look at the hem," she whispered. The binding on one edge had been re-sewn in smaller stitches than the rest. Anna's stitches. Quick and neat. Jonah took out his pocket knife, cut the thread carefully, and shook free a wrapped packet no larger than a Bible, tied in the same blue ribbon Anna used to keep in her hair on Sundays. For one suspended second, all the years between who he had been and who he had made himself be seemed to stand in the room together. Inside the packet lay Thomas Kincaid's survey sheet, 3 witness affidavits, a receipt with Silas Rusk's signature, and a note in Anna's hand. "She has the figures right. If the Lord gives her a road out, help her keep to it. And if it is you opening this, Jonah, do not mistake silence for peace. Some things only go quiet because nobody brave has spoken yet." Mara looked away while he read it. That mercy nearly undid him more than the note. Then boots hit the stairs. The first shot punched through the door before the knock came. Jonah blew out the match. "Window." They moved at once. Mara swept the papers into the oilskin. Jonah kicked the doorstop loose and shoved the bed against the frame as the handle jerked. Wood cracked. Harlan shouted. Another shot tore splinters over the washstand. Out the window, onto the sloped roof of the lean-to kitchen, down to the rain barrel. Jonah dropped first and caught Mara at the waist as she slid. For a breath, he had both hands around her and the whole warm weight of her against him. Then lantern light jumped in the window above, and they broke apart. They ran. Past the coop. Past Mrs. Bellamy's woodpile. Across the parsonage yard where the hollyhocks brushed Mara's skirt. Jonah heard Harlan behind them and a second set of boots cutting wide to trap the street. He hauled Mara through the livery's back bay, slapped Owen's startled horse into a whinnying panic to cover the noise, and burst out onto the freight road just as Silas Rusk himself rode in from the depot and with 2 men at his shoulder. Even in the dark, Rusk looked composed. That, more than anger, showed the size of his power. He had expected this. Expected Jonah to turn at last, perhaps only needed to squeeze. "Sheriff," he called, voice smooth as polished walnut. "You are making a private matter very public." Jonah kept moving Mara toward the cotton gin lot. "Funny. Public records are usually my first sign it isn't private." Rusk's horse sidestepped the lantern glare. "You think this county survives on sentiment? Those little claims out east amount to scrub and stubbornness. I made something here. Wells. Fences. Freight contracts. Men need wages more than widows need opinions." Mara stopped dead. Widows needed husbands too. You took some of those just as easy. Rusk did not even grant her a full glance. "Mrs. Kincaid, your difficulty has always been scale. You see a column and think it's a conscience." The rage that passed over her face was so clean it looked almost holy. A shot cracked from somewhere behind the gin. Wrench hands. More men than Jonah had counted. The world tightened down to angles and breath. He and Mara ran bent low between feed barrels, over a ditch, through the skeleton shadows of stacked timber. Jonah felt something hot score his ribs. A graze. Ignore it. Keep moving. They reached the dry creek south of town and lost footing in the shale. Horses thundered on the bank above. Rusk had driven them exactly where he meant to. One way out. One narrow rise. Lanterns bobbing at the top like wicked little moons. Mara gripped Jonah's sleeve. "Take the packet." "No. Jonah." It was the first time she had used his name, and even there, in the dark, with death arranging itself around them, he felt it. "If one of us rides through," she said, forcing the oilskin against his chest, "it has to be the one they still halfway expect to live." Above them, Harlan laughed. "Throw the books up, Kincaid, and maybe we'll let the sheriff keep his spine." Jonah looked from the bank to the packet to Mara's face. Rusk's men were closing. His badge was gone already in all the ways that mattered. His house, his standing, his last clean tie to bracken as it had been, gone with them. What remained was one woman in the dark offering him the truth and expecting, for once in his life, not to be chosen second. He curled his hand over hers on the packet, heard the hoofbeats bearing down, and understood the question at the center of himself, so sharply it felt like pain. If he could not keep both the woman and the thing she had risked everything to carry, what kind of man had all his caution made him? The answer came not as thought, but as movement. He shoved Mara flat, fired at the nearest lantern, and let the dark do what it had been waiting all night to do. When they finally stopped, it was in an abandoned chapel 2 miles west of town, where the roof still held on one side, and the altar had long since been taken for firewood. Jonah had no clear memory of the middle stretch, only of running bent double through greasewood and mesquite, of Mara half pulling him the last 50 yards when the graze at his ribs turned wet and weak, of the smell of dust and old cedar boards when the chapel door closed behind them. She made him sit on the floor beside the cracked baptism font and cut his shirt open with her pocket knife. "It's not bad," he said through his teeth. "That's what men say when they want to bleed in peace. It only clipped me. Then you'll have the pleasure of recovering." She cleaned the wound with water so cold it made him swear softly. Her hands were sure. Not gentle exactly. Competent. He watched the bend of her head, the concentration in her brow, the strand of hair the wind had worked loose near her cheek. Outside, night insects sang in the weeds. Somewhere far off a coyote called, and another answered, as if loneliness were a thing that always deserved reply. "Thomas died in a blasting cave," she said after a while, not looking up. Rusk cut corners on the braces and called it bad luck. I knew it wasn't bad luck because I'd seen the payment lines. Cheap timber. Missing charges. Favors owed. I carried that knowledge around like hot iron for 2 years. Then one morning I heard myself laugh at something in the mercantile, and it startled me because I'd forgotten my own voice could still do that. Jonah rested his head against the wall. Anna used to sing when she swept. Same hymn every Tuesday. Drove me near mad for the first month we were married. Mara's mouth flickered. Did you tell her? I was hoping to be alive long enough to get around to it. That landed where it should. She tied off the bandage and sat back on her heels. No sermon. No easy comfort. Just the truth sitting in the room with them, no longer forced to stand outside. He took Anna's note from the packet and folded it once more before tucking it away. Then he held out the little silver thimble that had fallen from the quilt when they cut the hem. Anna's, dented near the rim from years of use. She kept this in the sewing basket, he said. You should carry it tomorrow. In case the papers aren't enough and you need reminding someone believed you before all this. Mara looked at the thimble, then at him. That belongs to your wife. She trusted you with the truth. That makes it yours for as long as you need it. She took it with both hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The chapel was dark except for the lamp set low between them, and the light made every careful thing in the world seem possible again. Mara reached out then, almost without meaning to, and brushed the back of her fingers against his jaw where stubble had gone rough. Jonah caught her wrist lightly, not to stop her so much as to steady himself. The pull between them was plain enough to live on. He could have leaned in, could have taken what was waiting there in the dark where pain makes people brave and lonely makes them reckless. Instead, he let her hand go and looked at her as if the choice itself deserved respect. Not tonight, he said quietly. Not while you've got nowhere safe to stand, but next to me. She understood at once. He saw it in the way her eyes changed. Not wounded, not slighted, but deeply seen. That was the restraint that mattered, and she noticed it without a word. She drew her hand back, pressing Anna's thimble into her palm. You're a harder man than I first took you for. I was easier once. It did me no good. Mara gave one tired breath that might have been a laugh. Then, so softly he nearly missed it, she said, You don't owe a person your unbroken parts. Just the ones that are true. There it was, the second line worth carrying. Jonah looked at her a long time after that. Then tomorrow you'll have what truth I've got left. If that touched something tender in you, stay with it a second. There are some stories that do not ask us to cheer. They ask us to remember what it feels like when one honest soul makes room for another. And if that kind of feeling is why you come here, this is a good time to like the story and subscribe, because there are still a few quiet truths in this world worth keeping each other company for. Before dawn, they planned the rest. The Territorial Land Examiner would stop in Bracken only long enough to review pending transfer papers before boarding west. Judge Danner meant to present Rusk's filings in the church hall because the station office was too small for the crowd sure to gather. That meant witnesses. That meant public record. That meant if Mara and Jonah could get the real papers onto that table in full view of the town, Rusk would have to either argue the figures or reveal how little he feared being seen. People already know he's hard, Mara said, crouched over the packet. Hard men keep power so long as folks can call them necessary. The thing they can't survive is being made ridiculous by arithmetic. Jonah smiled despite himself. You say that like numbers are a weapon. They are, if one side has had them all to itself. They rode in with first light behind them and dust low at the horses' heels. Not down the back lanes this time. Straight in by the east road where the Bellamys, the Sotos, the Grubers, the Alvarez boys, and half the small holders east of Creekland would see them. Fear is quickest in private. Courage, sometimes, needs an audience. Mrs. Bellamy was first to step off the boardwalk. She had flour on her apron and a hat pinned crooked because she had clearly dressed in a hurry. Old Mr. Kelso from the feed store came behind her, spectacles sliding down his nose. The Soto brothers stood shoulder to shoulder, hat brims level. Little Owen Satterley was there too, whistling through his teeth though his face had gone pale. From the church hall porch, Judge Danner saw them and stopped with a folder in his hand. Silas Rusk came out a beat later, smooth as ever, though Jonah noticed the haste in his cuffs this time. Harlan Pike moved for his rifle. Don't, Jonah said. There was nothing loud in it. He didn't need loud. Half the town had heard him speak from horse thieves to drunks to men too drunk to know they were thieves. Harlan checked. Judge Danner drew himself up. Sheriff Vale, by order of this county. No, Jonah said. By habit of it, maybe. Order's another matter. He dismounted slowly, helped Mara down in full view of everyone, and did not put a hand on her as a prisoner. That alone changed the temperature of the morning. People feel dignity even when they do not yet know the facts. Rusk spread his hands. You've gone and turned a clerical dispute into theater. Mara stepped beside Jonah. A clerical dispute doesn't usually ride armed men into a wash. Murmurs moved through the crowd. Danner flushed. This woman stole official documents. She removed documents being used to steal official lives, Jonah said. There's a difference, though it does ask a man to read before speaking. That landed harder than he meant it to. A few heads turned toward the judge. Harlan's mouth set flat. Jonah took the packet from his coat and held it up where all could see the blue ribbon. My wife kept these. Witness copies, original survey, signed receipt. Mrs. Kincaid asked her to hold them if anything went wrong. Something did. Rusk gave a short, patient smile. Your dead wife cannot be cross-examined. No, Jonah said. But your handwriting can. He handed the survey to Mr. Kelso, who had once clerked freight tallies for the railroad and still trusted paper more than men. Mara opened the stolen ledger and began reading line by line. Not fast, not dramatically. That would have ruined it. She read the way rain falls into a stock tank, steady enough to become undeniable. April 3rd, she said. Water fee charged to Mrs. Abigail Bellamy for West Ditch maintenance. Mrs. Bellamy, your ditch lies east, and maintenance that season was paid in labor by your son Daniel before he died in November. Mrs. Bellamy lifted her chin. I never owed West Ditch anything. June 17th. 2 shares transferred from Nathan Gruber to S. Rusk Holdings. Mr. Gruber, you signed with an X your whole adult life after losing 2 fingers in the mill. Here the county copy shows a full cursive signature in blue ink. Old Gruber held up his hand without those fingers and let the crowd see it. August 9th, Mara went on. 3 acres moved off the Soto brothers' grazing line under delinquent tax correction. Tax correction was filed 6 days before the assessor rode the district. One Soto brother spat into the dust. Assessor never rode at all. The murmuring grew. Not outrage yet. Better than outrage. Recognition. Rusk spoke over it, still calm, but forced now into a louder register. Columns and clerks. This is what comes of letting small people mistake record-keeping for governance. Sheriff, stop this. Jonah almost smiled. You hear that, Bracken? We've been told exactly what he thinks of us. Danner snatched for authority. None of this is admissible unless... Unless what? Mara asked. Unless no one in this town can count? Unless widows are too lonely to remember what they paid? Unless a dead surveyor's work goes easy in the ground because the man who benefited had better cuffs? There it was at last, the thing Rusk had never accounted for. Not just evidence. Memory. Community. The plain accumulation of people who had each been told their loss was private and had just discovered it was shared. Jonah saw it move through them one face at a time. Mrs. Bellamy's pinched mouth easing into anger. Owen straightening. Mr. Kelso adjusting his spectacles and looking, really looking, at the receipt in his hand. Even Judge Danner, whose courage had always run second to convenience, began to see which direction history was tilting. Rusk tried one last turn. Even if the figures are off, this woman broke into a public office and assaulted a deputy. Harlan shifted. Everyone looked at him. Mara faced him square. Tell them how you locked the door. Harlan's jaw worked. She had county property. You told me nobody would care what was true after the papers were filed, Mara said. Go on. Tell them that part too. He looked to Rusk for help. Found none. That was the moment power began leaving the room. Jonah stepped closer, voice low. You can lie for him again, Harlan. But you'll be doing it while half the county stands here knowing the numbers. And numbers don't forget. Harlan dropped his gaze first. I locked the door, he muttered. Wanted the books back before the judge came. Louder, Mrs. Bellamy said from the crowd, and there was enough steel in it to shame a rail spike. He swallowed. I locked the door. She hit me when I reached for her. She had the ledgers because Mr. Rusk told me not to let the examiner see them. No one moved for a long second. Then Rusk laughed once, but the laugh had nowhere to land. So this is how it goes, he said. A county built by men willing to do hard things handed over to complainers with account books. It was never yours, Mara said. That, more than anything, finished him. The land examiner, a narrow man with dust on his cuffs from the morning train, had been standing unnoticed near the church steps through the last 3 minutes, listening with the fatal patience of bureaucracy confronted by undeniable proof. He took the packet from Jonah, the ledger from Mara, and the receipt from Kelso. "These filings are suspended pending territorial review," he said. "Every transfer named in this dispute is frozen. County copies will be taken into federal custody." Danner began to protest, then stopped when the examiner raised one finger without looking at him. Rusk's power did not collapse in one dramatic piece. It thinned. That was almost better. One ranch hand eased back from his shoulder. Then another. The Soto brothers turned their backs on him without asking permission. Mrs. Bellamy took Mara's arm as if escorting a guest, not shielding an accused woman. Owen grinned so hard it showed the gap in his teeth. Mr. Kelso asked, with devastating politeness, whether anyone would like him to fetch the rest of Rusk's filed copies from the recorder's shelf so there could be no confusion later. A man can survive hatred a long time if people are still looking at him. What he cannot survive is the instant they begin arranging the future without him in it. Rusk saw it too. His mouth flattened. He put on his hat, not with dignity exactly, but with the last scraps of habit mistaken for it, and stepped down off the church porch into a town that had already started turning away. By noon, the charges against Mara Kincaid had been withdrawn pending review, which is the sort of timid official phrase that sometimes means justice has finally found the front door and is trying not to startle anyone. By supper, 2 widows had come forward with receipts tucked in sugar tins. The Sotos had brought in their pasture maps, and Mrs. Alvarez swore before God and anyone else willing to listen that Mara had saved her boy's life, while half the county was calling her a criminal. Jonah turned in his badge that evening. He did it in Judge Danner's office with no audience but the judge and the empty coat stand, because some acts lose weight when they are performed for applause. Danner took the star reluctantly, as if it might still burn him by association. "You could keep the office," he said. "Once this passes." Jonah set the badge on the desk between them. "That's the trouble, Judge. Too much has been passing for years." Outside, the town was warmer than he remembered it being. It took 6 weeks for the territorial review to strip Rusk of the disputed holdings and return the creek claims. It took longer for decent men to admit how easily they had let themselves be instructed by convenience. But truth has patience where pride gets winded. Mara rented the little frame house behind the old school and turned its front room into a bookkeeping office for anyone east of Creek Land who wanted papers looked over before signing them. Farmers began coming in pairs, hats in hand, pretending they only needed a receipt copied while secretly asking her to read every line twice. Mrs. Bellamy sent over pies. The Alvarez boy, once recovered, ran messages for her and took payment in peppermint sticks. Little Owen claimed he was too old for errands until Mara caught him checking every latch on her windows at dusk. Jonah spent a month unsure where to stand. Then the county board, shamed by federal letters and local memory, asked him to take the office back under new terms and with Harlan gone. He agreed only after insisting the recorder's copies be audited quarterly and filed where any citizen could inspect them. Bracken called that stubbornness. Mara called it housekeeping. The first time he crossed her threshold after the dust settled, he found her at the table with her sleeves rolled and Anna's silver thimble on one finger while she repaired the hem of a feed sack for Mrs. Bellamy. "You kept it," he said. She glanced up. "I borrowed it. For 6 weeks." She smiled. And there it was at last, the thing both of them had been circling since the wash. Not rescue, not gratitude, but recognition. 2 people who had spent too long mistaking endurance for a whole life. He set his hat on the peg by the door. "You busy this evening?" "Depends who's asking." "The sheriff. I hear he's improved." He came closer. "The man, then." Mara laid the needle down. "That man took his time. He had some learning to do. So did I." He reached for her only when she reached first. No rush in it. No grabbing at what hardship had made possible. Just the quiet meeting of one true thing with another, and both of them old enough to know the cost of calling it by any lesser name. By winter, the house behind the school had a second chair on the porch and Jonah's coffee pot on the stove more mornings than not. By spring, people had stopped speaking of Mara Kincaid as if she were a storm the town had survived and begun speaking of her the way communities speak of the people they trust with their papers, their children, and the first news of trouble. Which is to say they spoke of her with dependence disguised as casual habit. Months later, when the cottonwoods went gold and the evenings came earlier, Jonah rode in from the south pasture to find the office lamp burning and Mara at the table with her ledger open, reading out acreages while Mrs. Bellamy shelled peas by the window, and the Alvarez boy, taller already, slept with his head on folded arms. Jonah stood in the doorway listening to the low murmur of women's voices and the scratch of Mara's pencil, and for the first time in years he did not feel like a man returning from somewhere. He felt like he had arrived. Mara looked up, saw him there, and said, with that calm certainty he had spent half his life searching for without knowing the name of it, "Some roads only look lonely till someone is waiting at the end of them." In the last amber light, their house sat small beneath the cottonwoods, with 2 horses at the fence and 1 steady lamp burning gold against the dusk. Next time, I'll tell you about the ranch hand who spent 15 years hiding the name on a grave that never belonged to the man beneath it, and why the widow who found out did not tell a soul for 3 days. Until then, keep faith with the quiet ones, and good night.